Welcome back, everyone, to episode number 29 of the Asset Investor Podcast. Today, I have a very good friend on the show, Rashid, who is a mortgage agent and advisor. And we're going to talk a lot about what's going to be happening in 2024 when it comes to interest rates. And he's the man when it comes to predictions, when it comes to what's going to be happening. So we'll do our best to make our predictions. But before we get into the meat and potatoes, why don't you introduce yourself, Mohammed, and how you got started into the mortgage industry, and what was your path before you got into mortgages?
Sure, yeah. First and foremost, it's an honor to be on the podcast.
My pleasure.
I watch it religiously, and so it's a bit of a different feeling actually being on it. But my background is I've been in technology for the past decade or so.
Yes.
I got my break at a company called Flip. It's a mobile app for flyers and coupons. Right. And the only reason I ever joined that company, this will tell you how naive I was when I was young. They were offering a free laptop and a free cell phone for employees, and I was like, this is the company I've got to join. And turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life. Nice. I stuck around at that company for 6 years. I was amongst the first 15, 20 employees, and we saw it scale to, just over 650 people worldwide. And so, while I was at Flip, my parents are immigrants, just like most people, and they were in the midst of buying their first home. And so they had worked with an agent, weren't too familiar with how mortgages worked or how finances worked, and so ended up, for lack of a better word, getting screwed on their mortgage.
Oh, wow.
High interest rate, tons of penalties associated with it, tons of fees associated with it, but they needed to close on their first home, and so they did. And so that was kind of an eye-opening moment for myself in trying to see if there was a better way to do this or to learn more about what they went through. And it turns out this is either good or scary. It's $300, 3 months, and you're licensed to be a mortgage agent in Ontario. And so I ended up taking the course myself. Yeah. I did it as a part-time gig, side hustle. And I ended up doing mortgages in parallel with my sort of daytime, full-time career. Yes. And so fast forward a few years, I ended up doing mortgages for most of the people I worked with at Flip, just by pure word of mouth. I stuck around at Flip for about 6 years. I left. I went to another startup. I genuinely enjoy building from the ground up. So I joined another digital sampling company called Sampler based in Toronto. Stuck around there for about a year, ran logistics. Before I got the itch to build my own company. Yeah. And lo and behold, this was the marriage of these two different worlds. Yes. I had mortgage experience doing mortgages for people. I had technology experience primarily on the operations, business development side. And I decided to marry those two worlds by building software for mortgage brokers in Canada. And so if you've ever met my wife, Fatima, probably one of my biggest supporters, but I quit cold turkey. I quit my job. I have no savings. She's pregnant with our first kid. And I was like, I'm going to do this. And so I quit my job. This is back in July of 2018. And I remember this day, incredibly supportive. And I'm super appreciative of her. And then fast forward, we built that company for about 2.5 years. Nice. And we ended up selling it at the end of 2020 to what's considered the monopoly in Canada for mortgage processing. It's a company called Finastra. So every time either it's a mortgage agent or a bank representative that processes a mortgage, it goes through their pipelines for adjudication. And so we sold to them, worked there for about a year. And then a year after that, I ended up, so my role now is sort of split into two different things. I work in the venture capital private equity world. So we take institutional capital from very high net worth wealthy people and reallocate it their investments. And then I'm also a mortgage agent working alongside Fatima in building out our brokerage and brand across Canada.
Did you always have this entrepreneur spirit when you were younger?
Yeah, it's. I always try to find the source or the origin of it. My dad's an entrepreneur. He came from Nairobi, Kenya. He was a welder back there. He's a contractor here, and I was the guy he would pull out of bed every Saturday morning and be like, let's go to work. Right. And I would hate it. Yeah. It was me, him, and my brother. And then, slowly over time, I realized that the skills I learned through, while I was a little kid doing this with him on the weekends, a lot of those learnings have contributed to what I've been doing in my modern day. Right. So I think that's where the root of it all came from. But it's been an incredible journey so far.
Yeah, no, similar story for me as well, because when I was young, my dad came to Canada in 1990, so he worked at RBC for a couple of years. Oh, nice. But his background was always business and entrepreneurship. So he had a few retail outlets for video game stores, clothing stores. Nice. So I used to go on the weekends and and I hated it. I was like, man, first of all, I hated retail and I hated talking to people. Surprisingly, I'm in real estate where that's my job. Yeah. But you realize that those sacrifices you make as a kid or the parents pushing you will actually help you in
You
the
don't
next
realize
10,
in the moment,
20 years.
though, but
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So that's an amazing story
Yeah.
to see where you've gone. And your wife Fatima has been a guest on the show a couple times. Actually, she was actually our first guest on the
nice.
show. So we've come full circle now.
Nice.
And I've worked with you guys for a few years now, so it's been an amazing experience. Now, just kind of giving our audience sort of a recap, about the interest rate world. Obviously, there's been a lot of news, a lot of headlines. So what's going on? It's a very interesting time. But before we do that, can you sort of recap what's been happening with interest rates in the last 18 months, I guess since the height of the lockdown and where we are now in this present day?
Sure. Yeah, it's probably been one of the most turbulent rides we'll experience in our lifetimes, and hopefully the last one. But the context of it is, a lot of what happened in the last, let's say, 12 to 18 months is driven by what's going on in the economy. And so, think back to the very beginning, a lot of the interest rates and the interest rate declines that happen are driven by COVID and the slowdown in the economy and a lot of those things. And it's important to understand that interest rates are a lever that you can pull to fuel the economy. And so when the market slows down, you'll see the Bank of Canada reduce its interest rates, you'll see bond yields come down, et cetera, all in an effort to get people to spend in the economy. And so you can imagine everybody and their mother, when interest rates are sitting at 0.5% or almost 1%, there's a flurry of activity. You see the housing market boom. And so this was around up until probably we saw the most impact of COVID, probably around March, April of 2020.
Right.
And so that's a little bit further back, but it was around that time, up until that moment, that we saw the end of the 0.5%, 1% interest rates. And so that was the first of almost 9-10 consecutive rate hikes that occurred over the last little while. And all in an effort to say, look, we had CERB, we had small business loans, we had low interest rates, all that fueled the activity, and it moved a lot faster than the bank expected. Yeah. And so the idea that these interest rate increases that happened were an effort to try and scale back, bring housing prices down, bring spending in line. And so that's the reason we've seen the 9 consecutive hikes. Now, on the interest rate side, probably up until March 2020, everybody was, there was sort of split focus between locking into fixed rates because they were at an all-time low, or no one could have anticipated 9 consecutive hikes. And so a lot of people were opting for variable, especially on investment properties. Those are the people that have probably been hurt the most.
Right.
And you look back at all the pundits and all the experts, and us included, because we couldn't anticipate 9 consecutive rate hikes, variable seemed like the right option at that time. Right. And so that tune has changed over the last little while. And the sad part is nobody has a crystal ball. Yeah. So I would say like 90+% of predictions, maybe 99% of predictions were wrong over the last 12 months.
And you think if COVID never happened, do you think we would still see rate hikes, or was this always going to be the plan where rates were going to stay low?
Yeah, I think historically, if you look at the trend in housing prices, like we always had that steep rise happening. Yeah. Let's say rates didn't hit 1.5%. Let's say they leveled out at 2 or 3%. I think there still would have been a flurry of activity, and I think that's also driven by, like even look at the immigration numbers. I think it was in 2020, it was announced that 1.2 million immigrants are going to come to Canada. Yeah. Where are you going to put them? Right. And so you see a mix between, we operate Canada-wide, so we see activity in Nova Scotia, we see it in Ontario, we see healthy activity in Alberta, but the concentration of them are coming to Ontario. And so I think what we've seen would have been amplified back in 2020. It would have happened anyways if the rates didn't increase. I think the rates are, to a certain extent, doing what they were designed to do, slow down the economy. I think you probably noticed this yourself. Right. Towards the end of 2023, we've seen a massive slowdown in activity. People are either on the fence, they're waiting to see what happens, they're hoping that the rate declines happen, but the rates did what they were supposed to, even though they caused a world of hurt for a lot of people. Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, we're seeing a ton of headlines and predictions for next year when it comes to rates. I've seen some people make some ridiculous predictions, and it's all opinions, so it's fair. I mean, people have their opinions and their stats. You being in the mortgage world and knowing people in the mortgage industry, what are the conversations you're having, and what is your personal prediction for 2024? Are rates going to go down, and by how much? Yeah, I think, again, nobody's got the crystal ball. I think everybody's throwing a blind dart right now and trying to figure out what happens. I think the most important thing to look at is what serves as influence and inspiration for how Canada defines its rates. And so, a few things come to mind. Number one, immigration hasn't changed this year. Towards the end of the year, we still have strong numbers. I think it was like the target was like 460 some odd thousand for Canada to pull in immigration. Number two, we look to the U.S.'s influence for what's going to happen in Canada, and so the U.S. so far has defined that they're going to do 3 rate cuts over the course of 2024. So we could look at that as an indication for what's going to happen in Canada. But the reason it's like really hard to make a prediction is, I was at a mortgage conference last year listening to Benjamin Tall, who's the CIBC chief economist. Yeah. And this was like, I think it was in August or September, and he was absolutely confident. He was having conversations with the Bank of Canada, and his advice to them was like, do not increase rates. And he's like, I feel confident that that's where we're going to land. Right. And lo and behold, the next announcement is they increased the rates. And so that's why I say it's really hard for anybody to predict. But where I would land is, I think the Bank of Canada is now realizing that people have felt the impact of the rate hikes that have happened. Right. And so when we look to next year, I think where the gamble is, I think rates are going to come down. They have to, because people have been pushed to the brink of being able to support what they're able to support. And so, of the announcements that are going to happen next year, I'd say it's probably between, really optimistic is like March, April. Right. We see a decline happen. Neutral territory is sort of towards the middle of the year, the June, July phase, and then really pessimistic is towards the end of the year. I'm gonna be in the incredibly optimist. Okay. In that I think it's going to happen in the early part of the year. Really? I think you start to look at, and we'll get to this in a second, but you start to look at the foreclosures that are happening or the power of sales. And I think you might see it in the pre-construction world as well. People are passing up their deposits on assignments, and people have sort of hit the brink of what they're able to support. And so all that is fuel for the Bank of Canada to say, okay, maybe we've pushed it to the brink. Right. Now let's reel it back in a little bit by dropping rates and fueling activity. Yeah, and it's interesting what you said, because you're talking from, I guess, more boots on the ground, like you're talking to customers and clients, and so am I, and I'm kind of seeing that as well. So I guess boots on the ground, what are the conversations you're having with your current clients? Like, are people being squeezed? Are you seeing people potentially that are going to have to sell because of mortgage defaults? Like, what do those conversations look like right now? Yeah, it's grim. And it takes a really strong stomach to have these types of conversations. I think there's a few things that play to consider. So number one, you've seen values of properties probably in the $1 million+ range see drastic drops. And so for folks who bought in the last, let's say 1 to 3 years that bought at peaks, their values are nowhere near what they used to be. So that's one part of the equation. Number two, for people who opted for a variable rate, a true variable, which means your payments are adjusting with the Bank of Canada's adjustments, they're feeling the pinch a lot more than others. Some people who are sitting the $600,000 plus mortgage are seeing their payments increase by $1,000, $1,500 a month. And that's a material amount for people to feel an impact. And then the third piece is with the cost of living in general. I don't know if you've been to the grocery store recently. It's night and day in terms of what the cost of living is for people in this area. So all of those factors combined, a lot of the discussions we're having, and it's important to understand in the mortgage world, there's 2 types of conversations we have. We're either focusing on the people who are buying homes, purchasing, and that happens in a rate neutral environment. When there's not a lot of purchase activity happening, we're looking at the renewal refinance. So the world sort of balances itself out. And so in this renewal refinance world, what's happening is, because of all these factors, on the renewal side, people are having sticker shock. So I was in a 2% rate. I now have to refinance at like a 6% rate. Right. That's a huge change in your monthly mortgage payments if they're not prepared for it. And then number two, some people are opting to add home equity line of credits or refinance to pull out that equity to just sustain their livelihood. And the hope is they're holding their breath that in the next year, or at least a year after, they have enough buffer to ride this wave out until rates come down to a more reasonable point. And so people are feeling the pinch. We're seeing people try to refinance where the values don't support it. And we're seeing people have to, in very dire situations, being forced to sell their homes just to get out on water. Yeah, and that's concerning, because I've unfortunately have had to help a few clients this year sell their homes because of the situation. But I'm not sure if you've seen it. Like, I was expecting a lot more distressed sales, a lot more sellers sort of saying, you know what, we can't handle payments. But to be honest, like, I haven't seen like a flood of inventory. I'm not sure if they're trying to ride out the wave, or if they're going to make that decision in the next 6 to 8 months. Like, is it just timing? Have you seen that flood of inventory, or people sort of calling like, look, I can't last another 3 months? Yeah, it's my personal opinion based on like what we see is that a lot of people are holding out on hope. that things are going to calm down or rates are going to come down to a much more reasonable position. And by doing that, they're extending themselves on credit in other aspects. So I'm going to borrow from my HELOC to weather this storm, or I'm going to refinance my home to pull out equity. And so in some of those situations, financially, to be responsible, it's our recommendation that, hey, you probably need to sell now. And so we have that dialogue with a few customers. And I think, on the purchase side, you often hear about bank of mom and dad and family helping out. And that's happening in this world as well, in this refinance renewal world where people need the extra capital. Families stepping in just like they would on a purchase to try and help everybody sort of weather that storm. But a lot of people, and my hypothesis as to why we're not seeing it as much as we think we should, is everybody sort of banding together to try and weather the storm together. But in contrast, that pushes people to a much deeper brink than ideally they'd
It's like
like
only
to.
a matter of time, right? Like how much can you hold on?
Exactly.
At some point, the bubble's going to
House of
burst.
cards.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's going to burst, and if it bursts, it could cause a lot of pain and problems down the road for sure. Unless the Bank of Canada decreases its rates, which I think hopefully they're, like you said, they are planning on doing so. Even with that decrease, let's say if it's a 1% decrease in the course of the next 12 months, is that enough relief for people, or do you still think people are going to have to sell, or there's going to be defaults happening?
It's relief nevertheless,
Yeah.
But it's relief after you've exhausted all your war chest. And so if you've used up your savings, if you've used up your line of credits, it makes it that much more difficult. But I think the silver lining here is the people who have now become accustomed to like a 6% or a 7% interest rate, any decrease in interest rates will be helpful to them. They've managed cash flow at the absolute maximum. Anything that can reduce their payments will be helpful for them. I think where a lot of the focus is going to be over the next 12 months is renewals. I think it's almost 25% of mortgages are coming up for renewal next year. And so the idea that people in that 2 to 3% range will now see rates around like 6.5 right now, they'll feel that pain. And so it's our responsibility to figure out how to navigate that, what other options look like, where's the best rates exist, et cetera. So a lot of that dialogue is happening much earlier than anticipated to prep for what's going to happen.
So I talked to a lot of optimistic realtors as well, and people in the comment where a lot of people are thinking that, once the Bank of Canada drops their rates even by 0.5% or 1%, that the market is just going to explode again. Me personally, because I've seen this in 2017 when there was a little bit of a crisis when Ontario came out with their rules and it slowed down the market big time. The year following, the market did improve, but it was very minimal. So it wasn't an explosion of activity. I believe personally that, the market will pick up a little bit, but I don't see this flood of buyers coming back all of a sudden. And the reason why is because number one, rates are still going to be pretty high. And number two, I think, a lot of people, in my opinion, are still waiting or trying to time the market, right? So I'm not sure what your thoughts are on the prediction of the market going forward, but do you think that a small rate cut is going to, bring a flurry of activity, or will it just be kind of gradual?
Yeah, I think my honest opinion is that there's likely a lag in when we see the material impact of like rate pauses or rate declines. And so the idea that like in our conversations, people are on the fence, people think technically we've bottomed out right now, and that the only way is for rates to decline and for prices to increase. And so a lot of people with that knowledge, seeing 2 consecutive pauses, are now feeling a little bit more comfortable entering the market. Where the dynamic changes is like, what are their expectations in terms of what they can qualify for? So the general rule of thumb for people who used to be able to buy, 20% down typically, was like you would be able to qualify for 5.5 times your household income. With the rate hikes that have happened, that's reduced to about 4.5 times. So almost like 20% decrease in your purchasing power. And so for the folks who have been sitting on the sidelines prepped, they're ready to pull the trigger as soon as possible in anticipation of rates coming down. And we'll get into like now the rate conundrum of should I go fixed or variable. But the idea that this activity is like slowly starting to ramp up, and I think the first rate hike will be the indication that there's going to be a number of consecutive declines. And so to capitalize on it. But from our perspective, I think we're not going to know that there's a flurry of activity until like almost after the fact. Like we'll see business picking up, we'll see activity happening, but you won't know that it's widespread until you see the news headlines say, hey, there's been a bunch of activity, a bunch of home purchases happen. So I think that lag causes us to think that we're not in it, but just even in the fragmented conversations we're having, there's activity there. It's just the volume's going to pick up in very quick fashion.
Okay. I've asked your wife this question in the past about, what to do when it comes to mortgage, fixed or variable.
Yeah.
And she gives, her answer is really good because she always mentions that it's based on your personal preference and what what gives you peace of mind at the end of the day, right? Mm-hmm. But that was a year and a half ago when rates were slowly increasing. Mm-hmm. Now with the prediction of rates coming down, like, how do you advise to somebody what mortgage they should get? How do you time that, product for an individual?
Yeah, I think probably one of the few things we're like wholeheartedly aligned on. Yeah. We work together and we live together, but interest rates and being based on personal preference is something we're 100% aligned on. I think, and I also go back to my original point where you listen to chief economists across all these banks, you listen to all the predictions that are happening, and everybody was wrong over the last 12 months. And so it's very hard to rely on somebody's prediction for where rates are going to go. It seems obvious in light right now. The other thing I look at is I look at historical trends and if you look at all the consecutive rate hikes that have happened in the past, let's say over the last 40, 50 years, one of the most telltale facts is that at the last rate hike that occurs, it typically takes 9 to 14 months-ish for rates to come back to a normal level. Right. And so let's say our last hike was I think it was in October. Let's say that was the last hike. So from now until about 14 months out is when we should expect to see rates go down. Now that's looking at past trends, et cetera, and where things are going to head. But on the topic of whether you choose fixed or variable, it genuinely does boil down to personal comfort. Right. And even if you think rates are going to go down, let's say we see some sort of freak accident and rates magically go back up for a certain point again. As an individual, can you stomach the idea that your payments may go up? Right. Because people may look at their mortgage payments as a fixed amount, it's never going to change. But for folks who offer a variable rate, if it does, how does that impact your lifestyle? Yeah. And so the idea that we're seeing a lot of people now switch between shorter term fixed rates, ride this wave out in hopes that rate decline and refinance in 2 or 3 years. If you want to sleep easy, if you want to know that your payment will not, without a shadow of a doubt, change over the course of the next 3 years, and you're still going to continue to make payments towards your principal, you are absolutely in the fixed camp. Yeah. If you want to roll the dice and gamble and have the stomach for it, the trend shows that we should be riding the wave down on variable, but know that anything can happen in this market. And so if a rate does go up, you won't feel the pinch, nor will you feel bad if they go up. So that's why I often associate variable rate holders as gamblers. And so not legitimately, but they have a certain level of risk tolerance that others might not have.
Right. And I guess right now, sitting here January 1st, 2024, what are the rates looking like right now? I've heard some banks already reduce their fixed rates. What are you seeing right now in terms of rates, both fixed and variable?
On where rates are at, it's important to understand two things. So on variable rates, it's pegged against the Bank of Canada's overnight lending rate. So variable rates will not change unless the Bank of Canada reduces or increases its rate. But on the fixed side, they're tagged to the bond yields. And so as the government of Canada's bonds, they increase or decrease their yields, that's where you see activity happen on the fixed side. And so over the last, I want to say 4 or 5 weeks, we've seen a steady decline. Okay. And it's typical for the end of the year that bond yields are seeing a steady decrease. And so on the high ratio side, where you're putting less than 20% down, it's under $1 million purchase price, rates have cracked the 4. Okay. So we're in the 4.99, 4.94 mark for high ratio mortgages. In the 20% and above down payments, $1 million plus homes, you're probably sitting around for people opting for shorter terms, you're in and around the 6.5 range. Okay. And because of what's going on in the market and the anticipation for rates to go down, the bond yields to go down, a lot of people are opting for anywhere between 1 to 3 year fixed rates. They're a little bit higher, but the idea is I'll feel the pain for 1 or 2 years. Yeah. I'd rather not lock myself into a 5-year term at 5.5 or 6%. So being able to capitalize on the shorter terms in hopes that we do see a 1.5% decline over the next year, and they refinance into something a lot lower at those rates.
What are some regulation news or updates that you've been looking at? Because I know there's been a ton of talk and discussion. What can we anticipate for 2024 when it comes to the stress test and amortization? What's the word of the street right now when it comes to those regulations?
Yeah, you kind of rely on the the insurance bodies like the CMHC or the Bank of Canada to run these, and they've run assessments over the course of the last 12 months, and to be completely frank, they've yielded nothing.
Okay.
And so, like that's tax dollars going to use. And so, the idea was like, can we assess the stress test? Is it a viable or legitimate way to be able to test somebody's ability to purchase? You know, the stress test cap was 5.25 when rates were lower. Yeah. We're now seeing people qualify at like 8-9% right now. And so that was the big question mark, is should we still continue to do that? And they conducted a 4 or 5 month long assessment. They had input from brokers, from consumers, and the net result was we're not changing anything.
Okay.
So there are no material changes planned yet. Okay. There's still assessments happening on the go, but my personal opinion is that's going to go back to the back burner.
Okay.
The idea that there's an expectation that rates will continue to decline over the next 12 months means it becomes less of a problem that people are voicing their opinion on, because it's heading in the direction that they expect to. As it goes up, and as we hit the 8-9%, everyone was vocal about the stress test not being a valid method to determine qualification.
Right.
But now we're sort of seeing that pull back a little bit now that we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah. I guess because the stress test was brought in because they wanted to protect consumers, I guess, when rates were like at 2.5, and to see if they qualify for 5%, 5.5. So if we're already at 5-6% rates, why do they still have to qualify at 8%? Like, I never understood that.
Yeah, I'm probably the one person in that side of the camp that I think the stress test is important. I think, like for financial, like just being prepared on the financial side of things, the idea that nobody could have prepared ourselves, like I think the Bank of Canada never anticipated themselves going beyond 5.25. And so the fact that we sit in that camp, even folks that are qualifying at 6, 7, 8, 9%, I think it's a relevant exercise for them to go through to understand that this, freak accident that happened in rate hikes could happen again. Yeah. And so I think it's a good exercise to just be prepared on the consumer side. And a lot of the times what people don't realize is when you go into these qualifications, on the mortgage side, just the general rule of thumb is like the guidelines are you don't want to exceed 44% of your household income associated with your debt obligations. And that's total. And that's against gross household income, not net.
Right.
So that means your car payments, your utilities, your debts, your credit cards, your line of credits, your home expenses should not exceed 44%. Yeah. The reality of this situation is people are probably like 80+% and maybe paycheck to paycheck. Yeah. And so one of the key things to understand is while that stress test happens on the mortgage side and it caps you at 44% for all your expenditures, the minute you close on a home, there's nobody rechecking to make sure that you're still within the 44%. So the person who buys a house and then goes immediately buys a car or goes on a lavish vacation, etc., those things aren't factored in, and that starts to surmount to a certain point. It makes it difficult for people. So I think the stress test is relevant as much as people hate it. Yeah. And it doesn't do a complete job, but it, to a certain extent, looks out for the consumer in purchasing.
Makes sense. You were talking about renewals earlier, right? So we're going to hit the bulk of renewals probably the next couple of years. Yep. As these renewals come up and people kind of feel that sticker shock of price increases or mortgage payment increases, where do you see, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but where do you see the market going? Like, do you think with the increase in mortgage payments for every household, is there going to be capacity for more people to enter the market in the future, given the home prices?
Yeah, I think there's 2 ways to look at renewals. And so there's like one side of the equation, which is I get a renewal notice and I am going to shop it around because I don't think my bank's going to be the best offer. And so there may be a little bit of wiggle room to save you some money on a monthly basis. But that comes at a cost because you now have to refinance with another bank. You've got to pay legal fees, et cetera. And it's got to be worthwhile from a dollar's perspective for you to make that jump and pay that cost. For a lot of people who are feeling the bind or the pinch, when a renewal notice gets sent to you, oftentimes people will just sign the paper and renew. There's no requalification that happens. Right. There's no checking of your ratios or your income levels, et cetera. And so oftentimes some of the easiest path to avoid the stress that people might face in having to qualify, they just sign the renewal notice and they carry on as is, and they figure out a way to make them. They don't check anything at all. And so they make it a point to just figure out a way to make their monthly obligations. Right. And so that's the 2 camps we sit in. I think one of the things that we stress the most is it's never, like it doesn't cost you anything to explore your options. Yeah. And so there, I don't know if you read, there was a Scotiabank article that came out, I think it was a couple months ago, and they openly say that they're looking to cull their customers. So the idea that they grade their customers internally and decide who is a worthy customer or not. And in that camp, they're going to be offering renewal rates much higher than some other lenders in an effort to get that customer to move away.
Oh, wow.
Seems like a crazy practice, right? And so it's their way of trimming their book to sort of keep their customers in a certain, within certain parameters. And so in that world where somebody, may just want to sign and continue on, that's the world in which we encourage people to just have a conversation. It could be us, it could be another mortgage broker, somebody you trust, but have the conversation, understand, is this piece of paper that I have in front of me a good offer, or are they taking advantage of me, and is there somewhere else that I can seek out a better rate? Oftentimes, even going back to your own bank and negotiating with them may actually yield a better result.
Right, no, that's some great advice. I always say to my clients that, just speak to a mortgage broker, speak to you or Fatima. It's a consultation, but you never know. You might get something better, right?
The number one question we get anytime somebody engages with us is what's your fees and what do you charge? And I think to bust the myth. We don't charge any fees. We get paid by the bank.
Right.
And so the idea is it's in our best interest to find you a product that makes sense and where to place you. And so it's our responsibility to we have access to over 120 different lenders. We can see 3,000 plus mortgage products. Versus you going to a single bank and only having an array of maybe 3 or 4 products.
Absolutely.
It's very important to have that dialogue, whether with us or anybody else. Just have the conversation.
Right, absolutely. Makes sense. No, that was a great discussion on interest rates. We're going to talk about something else now, which I didn't warn you on, but do with all my guests is to kind of get you to know you more personally on a personal level. So,
of course.
Let's talk about, real quickly, what's your favorite place to travel?
Dubai.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's... we're actually going in February, but I think I find it's the best of all worlds. I think I'd love looking for a place that has halal food. And there's a number of options.
That's key, man.
I think, exactly. And I think there's so much to explore that even if you're gone for a year, the next year you come back, there's all these new things for you to discover and explore. And then number 3 for me is most important is we've got 2 kids, so a 7-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son. And so it's really important that anywhere we go has a lot of activities for them. And so and lastly, how can you beat the weather? Come on.
Especially February.
when you look at Toronto like this right now, it's you really want to get away as soon as possible. So
that's good. That's an awesome place to be. Favorite cuisine or a place to eat?
Cuisine.
Not sure if you saw my last podcast with the food.
I did. Mujahid is the renowned expert.
Quite a few recommendations.
I got to take him up on his burger recommendations.
I'm
honestly I really love Pakistani food.
Really?
Lahori or
nice.
Really get your hands dirty, kebabs, chickens. That's my go-to.
That's your go-to.
My favorite. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Favorite movie or TV show?
Favorite
if
movie.
You get time to watch.
I love movies. I'm a big Christopher Nolan fan. So I love the Interstellars, the Inceptions, the Dark Knight series that he did. Him and Guy Ritchie. So Snatch and all these other movies. I love those 2 directors and anything that they put together.
Nice. So Dark Knight's definitely a classic. So I got to watch it before the holidays end. So that's on my list. Last question is, what's the best piece of advice somebody ever gave you?
The best piece of advice somebody ever gave me is always say yes and figure it out. And I think this was most important for me when I was building our company. It was called Door. The idea was you start off, it was myself and 2 other co-founders, and we started off the business, wide-eyed and super excited, and it turns out that the world of entrepreneurship isn't as glamorous as it seems to be in the media and companies raising hundreds of millions of dollars. It is high intensity, high stress, and even when you start hiring folks, you have a bunch of people that are you're responsible for, and so. One of the things, it was actually my uncle who told me this, who's an entrepreneur as well. His advice was, never say no to a customer. Always say yes and find a way to accomplish or achieve what it is they're trying to do. And for us, one of the services we had launched on our platform was, mortgage brokers found it really difficult to, I would ask a customer, I need your notice of assessments, I need your T1 generals, I need your T4s, et cetera. And half the people never remember when they get their documents where they put them. And so we had built one of the first services in Canada through our platform that allowed these mortgage brokers to retrieve, as long as they have authorization from the customer, retrieve those documents directly from the CRA on their behalf.
Oh, nice.
And they would pull it within 30 seconds.
Wow.
And so we had, somebody had told us, a lot of people told us about their problems, they told us about the challenges and that existed for them, and we're going to figure it out. And I had no idea how we were going to do it. But I had the backing of my 2 co-founders who were incredible engineers and product guys. And we went back to the drawing board and we spent a couple weeks trying to figure out a solution for what we thought was one of the biggest problems. And we were the first to bring it to market. And so it lives with me that it's kind of like that, like fake it till you make it, but don't really fake it. Have conviction, have confidence that you can achieve what you set your mind to. And take the roadblocks as they come, the challenges as they come. It's all a learning experience for you as you progress.
No, that's fantastic, man. Thank you so much, Mohammed. I appreciate it.
I appreciate
really
having me.
admire your success and story.
Thank you, likewise.
And if you have any questions on the mortgage side, you can always talk to Mohammed and Fatima as well. Amazing mortgage brokers and advisors. We'd love to give you a consultation. If you have any questions about the real estate market in 2024, feel free to reach out to me as well. And we'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you very much, guys.